Welcome back to CBTV. I'm joined here by Gaye Parker. She was in the very first ever City Beach team. Tell me, Gaye, how has the game changed compared to when you started playing?
Well, that's a big question because since 1959, when the club started, there's actually been changes to the rules, changes to the positions that people could play on the court, and then, of course, the speed. And being a short person, I'm particularly interested in the fact that really, for the upper grades, height is a big advantage. Mm-hmm. So I think they're the main areas that I have seen over the years that have changed.
And you did just mention in your speech before how there was no centre circle.
Yes, I remembered that very clearly because I was a centre player. So I think that's really interesting because no doubt the association or the netball people at women's basketball, as it was then called, it wasn't called netball, the two centre players stood on a line about 2 metres long and parallel to the third lines, to the centre third lines. And so the centre player didn't pick up her opposition until the ball was thrown, and then she was really quite close to her. The other interesting difference was that, of course, the wing and the wing attack and the defence, wing defence, were limited to half of the goal third. So there was a line. Oh. There was a line running down the goal circle that divided the goal third into halves, and you couldn't go on that other side. Now I'm thinking that probably what they decided to do was to speed up the game. Mm-hmm. So it allowed the centre, as if my memory is correct, was only allowed in the centre third. Oh, so wow. It enabled this, as you can imagine, if the centre is allowed more space, the wing attack, the goal attack and the shooter, the goal attack, if they're allowed more space, then the play flows more. And whereas I remember when I played, there was you were offside a lot because there were a lot of boundaries to be offside.
Don't you hate that? Yeah.
Yes. So
very interesting. Did you say back in your day when you started, it was called women's basketball?
Yes, called women's basketball.
That is why my grandmother always says basketball.
Yes.
And netball.
Yes.
Anyway, I'll start forgiving her now. What were your uniforms like?
Well, my mother designed the uniform.
Oh, really?
Because we lived at the back of Marge, and we had a fence, a gate in the fence, and we traipsed through forwards and back, the two families constantly. My mother was a dressmaker, and she designed the red uniform, which at that stage was a dress, a classic school uniform dress that had 3 box pleats at the down the centre and a little yoke across there and a belt. And then for the pocket, because we were at the school, my mother embroidered a pocket, and I remember being in the classroom demonstrating this uniform that Mum had designed with the pocket, and Mum very carefully explaining that the B looped over the S and which way it went. And so
could have had a career in modelling. Forget netball.
If you've ever seen any of those photos of me up there, you would have. So what happened at the end of our primary school, when Marge had developed us or initiated the little team, we had nowhere to go. So, but we had this lovely uniform, and we had a pocket that said CBS, for City Beach School. So when Marge expanded and naturally we kids said, where are we going to play next year? There wasn't anywhere to play, so she developed the club. We were then left with a pocket that said CBS, and we couldn't then call ourselves City Beach School. So the trick was the club had to be called something that started with S.
You nailed it.
Which is where the surface has come from.
Fantastic.
So that's where, and the uniform was like that for years. And then also at the opening, I remember, of the Matthews Centre, there were strict rules about how long the uniform was. I remember kneeling down, as maybe 200-300 girls did, on the courts, and someone for the opening would come along with a ruler, and they would measure the length from the floor to where your knees were, and the skirt had to be that long, and so you couldn't wear it any shorter than that.
Oh, they would hate our uniforms now.
Well, that's right. The changes are huge, and of course we're not looking at anything lycra. Everything was cotton.
Yep.
So it was a long time before that uniform changed, actually.
Wow. Do you still see any of your teammates that were in that team with you?
I see some of them because we all came, most of us came from that very defined area around the City Beach Primary School.
Yeah.
And in fact, we just had a reunion 2 weeks ago of the streets, including my parents and Marge, so that the people that played in those teams were at this little reunion we had just to gather together the people in the 4 or 5 streets around, because City Beach at that time was not the exclusive suburb that it is now, because it was so isolated. There were few buses, no shops, and people didn't have cars to get around very much, not the women staying at home. So it was a very tight-knit community compared to even Floreat and Wembley, which were much more developed.
Wow. Was Mrs. really tough?
She was.
Yeah.
She was always tough, but we were so enthusiastic to have this game and to have, and of course, like anything, we just accepted whatever she said, and I think because with the influence of Bet Allison and Dorothy Roberts, she had a lot of good help to call on. And so whatever she said, we did. And as you can imagine,
she would have liked that.
She was as rigorous then as she was, in her later years. Yeah. So, and we obeyed, and that was everything. I remember playing the first team that we played in with that initial founding club team. We were in E3 juniors. So you can imagine how many junior teams there were. And before Matthews Centre was opened, we played at schools, or maybe Langley Park, or Joel Terrace, which is down near Maylands. Often those areas would be swamped because of the winter. And it was very, very muddy and mushy. But until the Matthews Centre was opened, that's where people, and parents in those days, carted kids around, so we went to whatever school or little park it was where the netball was played.
And how successful was your team?
We weren't...
See many medals, many premierships?
No, we weren't very successful, except in the beginning stages, because we were so young.
Excuses, that's what I'm hearing.
But as we got up higher, of course, the club became bigger, and we recruited players from clubs like Scarborough and the Perth Netball Club, where they didn't perhaps field as many teams, and so we got some good players. And I think at one stage, in the state junior team that I was in, there were 5 or 6 City Beach Surfers netball girls represented in that state team. So that's an indication of how strong it was. Probably the next year, we moved into A1 grade, and we were so
with the big dogs
out of our depth. Yeah. And I remember reading a headline in the paper that said debacle, and I always remember that word. It was City Beach debacle, and we had lost by so much, but we were so young.
Rough.
And then of course, obviously, later, people went on and had got premierships and everything. But in those days, it was a struggle, but there were still representatives in the state teams.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being our second guest for CBTV.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming to Mrs. Willie's tribute as well.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
You stay classy, San Diego.